it's hard to believe that we have been connecting with freshwater stewardship partners for 20 years, and I'm so proud to be a part of it. For anyone that don't know me, my name is Melissa Dakers, and I work for Watersheds Canada. I'm part of the Lake Links Planning Committee, and you can just call me Mel. And I'm really happy to be your host today for our second online Lake Links meeting. And today's theme is Take the Challenge, okay? So we're gonna connect what we say and what we actually do in order to protect our lakes and rivers. There's always been a big disconnect. We all value the water. We all value our surroundings and our nature, but are you actually taking steps on your property or when you're near the water to help protect it for future generations? And that is what today's workshop is all about, and information that we'd like to share with you. So I'm just gonna go through a few housekeeping. So last year we used Google Meet. This year we're using Zoom. So things are slightly different, but I think after the last year and a half with the pandemic, a lot of people are getting used to these webinar features. They're all pretty similar, slightly different. So just a few housekeeping things. Please note your microphone will be muted during the presentation, unless you are the guest speaker, obviously. And we're also asking everyone to turn off their videos to preserve bandwidth. And please note that we are recording the sessions today, and they will be available on Watersheds Canada's Lake Links page. You will be sent out all the details after the webinar and the link to the videos. So you can share this with other people and recommend it to your members and on your associations, which is great. Or if there was something you didn't catch and you want to make some notes in the future, you can go back to those videos. Last year's videos are also online as well, in case you weren't able to join us last year. In the middle of the screen, you'll notice that there is a chat box. There's an arrow there, and Monica will be asking questions in this. Please interact with her and us. We love to hear where you're from, what your passions are, anything you want to say to the group. Put it in the chat. If you do have to leave us, there is the end button in the corner. We're sad to see you go. Hopefully it's not till the end of the webinar. Okay, and if you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Okay, just a brief agenda. I guess it's not a brief agenda. We have a lot on the docket today. And I'm not going to read through all of them. You're all pretty aware, but we have some great guest speakers today. And I'm really looking forward to spending the day with you. But first, we need to say happy anniversary, Lake Links, 20 years. It's just so hard to believe that this is the 20th Lake Links. And I am sad that this isn't in person. I was really, really optimistic we would do this in person, but maybe next year. There goes my phone. That's great. Someone's excited. Just ignore that. So just to let you know, Lake Links started in 2002 with a very small gathering of lake stewards and organizations. And now look how far we've come. Every year we're reaching more and more people across Ontario, across Canada. We even had someone from last year that joined us from Australia. So we're reaching more and more people are becoming aware of stewardship and how we protect our fresh water. For those that are new to Lake Links, we consist of a dedicated planning committee, and some of us have been involved in it right from the beginning. I'm not going to name any names, but our current committee consists of dedicated staff and volunteers from multiple organizations and associations and groups. We have people from Mississippi Valley Conservation Authority, Rideau Valley Conservation Authority, Cataraqui Conservation, the Lake Networking Group, Friends of the Tay Watershed, and Watersheds Canada. So I want to thank all of our planning committee for the dedication that you have given us for over the year to make this happen. we do take a whole year to plan the event. So as soon as this one's done, we'll be working on next year's. So it is an annual event, and it is something that we are all passionate about. And I think it's the only committee that I know of that members don't tend to leave. We become really good friends, and we enjoy working on this because we know we're able to share such great information with all of you. So without further ado, I'd like to share with you just a little highlight of the last 20 years. One moment. Hope you all enjoyed that little walk down memory lane. I really enjoyed going through all the photos and just seeing how many people we have reached over the years, and it really touched my heart. Okay, let's go back to our slideshow. Okay. Oh, what happened there? Okay, so now we're going to move on to our guest speakers. Karen Hunt, if you would like to unmute. Pull up your camera if you'd like.
Good morning, everyone. Mel, that was a wonderful review. Thank you so very much. That was really exciting. And now On behalf of the 2021 Lake Links Planning Committee, I am very pleased to introduce our first presenter this morning. Dr. Nathan Young is a professor of sociology at the University of Ottawa. His recent research includes studies of climate change, politics, conflicts over fisheries and agriculture, the role of different types of knowledge in environmental management and decision-making, and community resilience in the face of environmental changes. He regularly collaborates with natural scientists on research into the human dimensions of environmental issues. Nathan, we are delighted to have you with us this morning. I know that you have much to share with us. Over to you, Nathan.
Well, thank you very much, Karen, for that introduction. First of all, I want to apologize for not having my camera on. I'm in the suburbs of Ottawa, and it's a Saturday morning, and I think that the Netflix draw in my neighborhood is such that if I have it on, I seem to get kicked off. So for the presentation itself, I'm going to keep it off, and then I'm going to plan to turn it on for the Q&A, if that's all right with you, Mel.
That works fine. And just let me know when you want me to advance your slides.
Okay.
Great.
So let's get started. So the topic that I'm going to be discussing today is how to connect values to our actions for our conservation goals. I want to say, first of all, that this is an academic perspective, and there are lots of other perspectives out there that are possible, including practical perspectives, and it might be worthwhile to talk about that in the Q&A after, because there's a real dynamic there in between what the research tells us and then also what practitioners tell us. If there was a subtitle to my talk, it would be, how can we promote the development of pro-environmental values? And then how do we try to connect those values into meaningful actions for our conservation goals? And I have to say off the hop that there are no magic bullets here. Human behavior is extraordinarily complex, and there is a real gap, as was mentioned earlier, in between the kinds of things that we say that we value and the kinds of actions that we actually engage with in the real world. And so the connections, they are not clear. And I'm going to be presenting some of the research that we have done in the field to try to better understand this dynamic. If we can go next, please. So an overview of the presentation that I'm going to be giving you today is that I'm going to start by talking about a couple of different theories of pro-environmental values and actions that are based in the social sciences. And so I'm going to be primarily drawing on theories from psychology and also sociology to try to frame this. I'm going to be talking about short and long-term strategies for trying to encourage change in values and actions, although that one is actually going to be my last topic, because in between the two, I'm going to be talking about findings from an online survey that I and my group conducted as part of the NSERT grant. And I saw in the slideshow a few images of some other members of our team who have spoken to you in the past, including Jessie Vermeer, Christine Baudouin, and Isha Mistry. In the last 2 to 3 years, we've been conducting quite a bit of research on the Rideau Canal and also on the Trent Severn Waterway. Today, I will be presenting extremely briefly a few findings about values and actions on these two waterways that show that there's quite a firm foundation in order to promote these changes. We'll go next, please. So in the first part of the presentation, I'm going to be talking about 4 different perspectives on pro-environmental values and actions. And so these are different perspectives that have different strengths and weaknesses, and they put different emphasis on different parts of the gap in between values and actions. So the one that I'm going to start with is probably the oldest one. It is built around the concept of the conservation ethic. And a conservation ethic is essentially a set of ideas that motivate people to see value in nature and then to protect it. The ethic, in terms of research that's been done over the last like 50 to 60 years, is essentially thought to be built on experiences in nature. So that the more experiences in nature that people have, the more motivated they are to act in terms of trying to protect it, and the more likely they are to develop pro-environmental values. Now, a particular emphasis in this theory is on childhood experiences. And so people who have unstructured childhood experiences in nature. So we're not talking about organized activities as much as free play, free time, camping, and so on, cottaging and so on, are far more likely to develop pro-environmental values as they age. So I mentioned that this is kind of an older perspective, and it's one that hadn't been getting a lot of attention actually up until our current experiences with COVID that have reinvigorated interest in the theory, in particular because during periods of lockdown, it became clear that people were being deprived, especially in urban areas, of experiences with nature, and that this was having a real impact in terms of mental health and in terms of their well-being. And so experiences in nature have become kind of a hot topic again, and it's getting more attention by psychologists in particular to try to understand this link in between experiences and then ethics. So I do have to mention too that from this perspective, and this is not shared by all of the perspectives, but from this perspective, the emphasis is really on values and how values motivate and guide action, so that the development of values through the ethic then leads to specific actions later on in life that are pro-environmental. The next one, please. The second theory that I want to discuss today is actually quite different, and it comes mostly out of the United States, trying to understand why certain people are then motivated to support certain causes. And so it's not just an environmental theory, but a theory of broader political support more generally. And it's called value belief norm theory. It is very well summarized in the quote here that individuals who accept a social movement's basic values, who believe that valued objects are under threat, and who believe that their actions can help to restore those values, experience an obligation that is called a personal norm for pro-movement action that creates a predisposition to provide support. So in this theory, what really matters is the alignment in between an individual's basic values, the belief that their actions can be effective, and then the actions of a broader organization. Okay, so according to this theory, all of these things are key, but what is really important is that there is a kind of a moral alignment in between the individual and the organization that is trying to effect change. So it is a very individualistic kind of a theory. Next, please. This contrasts with another theory, which is called the theory of planned behavior. It comes out of psychology primarily, and it is not so concerned with the moral core. It's not so concerned with values, but it essentially argues that if you're looking at an individual's behavior or a group's behavior, that these are best understood as being rationally planned in order to advance personal interests. So values are not really considered. In effect, this is actually quite a powerful theory in terms of explaining things like political alignment. It looks at individuals as having specific desired outcomes. And if we translate this into the environmental sphere, that could be wanting an outcome that involves protecting a particular valued thing, or that they have some kind of gain or advantage that they would like to secure. So again, in the environmental field, if you look at what's called NIMBY activism, or not in my backyard activism, if somebody is trying to protect a property value, for example, then they will be highly motivated to act. The third point here is probably the most important, though, because it is different from the values, beliefs, norms, and from the conservation ethic perspective, in that it argues that quite a number of the actions that individuals engage in are motivated by a need or a desire to impress others or to conform to norms. And so this puts us more into the sociological field, where we argue that a lot of human behavior is engaged with in order to improve or to conform in our relationships to other people. Next, please. So the fourth one, and there's a reason why I put it fourth, and it's because this is the theory that I think kind of brings it all together. So it brings the best parts of each of the prior three to present a very logical approach to trying to connect values to action. It's called social influence theory. That's a label that I have given it. It's called a lot of different things, actually, in the broader literature. And as I mentioned, it really kind of brings them all together. And it also has an important a temporal component, in that it will address how things evolve through time. So as you can see in the slide, it's organized as a wheel, and we can start at any point in that wheel. I'll start with values, because those are the things that are thought to precede the other two, at least in terms of being a motivator for action. And it essentially argues that strongly held values will motivate behaviors. So that if we value the environment, if we value a watershed, if we value biodiversity, it will motivate behaviors that develop over time. It then argues that behaviors that are repeated, so that become a part of routine, and that are also conducted publicly, so in the full view of other people, they get into conversations and discussions that we have with our friends and neighbors, that they then create social norms. And a social norm is different from a personal norm. A personal norm is a personal motivation to act. A social norm, sociologically speaking, is a broader expectation of a particular behavior, so that you create over time an expectation of pro-environmental behaviors inside of a group or a network. With these social norms, they then foster and they reinforce existing values, and they promote the spread in new directions, including towards new generations, so that the norms, they spread through networks, and they also spread to children, which will also bring us back to the core emphasis of the conservation ethic perspective. Next, please. So inside of social influence theory, there are two related terms. One is the term of social networks, which is the observation that we all exist inside of broader social networks that connect us to other people. And a core observation here is that social norms tend to spread through social networks. We have a lot of influence over our peers. When we join groups, we join normative environments, and we have an opportunity to spread our own examples of behaviors and normative preferences through those groups. And then the second term is the term of social capital. And social capital is a term that refers to the resources that exist in the relationships that we have with other people. And social capital is increasingly thought of as being the foundation for action. Okay, so social capital in the connections that we have to other people, the relationships that we build networks of obligation and of reciprocity. And so social capital is the foundation for social organization and coordination. Next, please. So I want to connect the rather academic discussion of the four theories that I just went over to some of the findings from the online surveys that we conducted in 2019 and 2020 in the Rideau Canal and in the Trent Severn waterway. So the numbers that you see on the left there are the numbers of respondents to each one of the surveys. The surveys were slightly different in that they had different names. We asked people who either lived or who cottage or who visit the Rideau Canal to ask questions specifically about that waterway, and the same with the Trent Severn. We managed to get close to 1,800 responses to the online survey. And I just want to talk in a very basic way about some of the findings. Next, please. So this is just a quick little summary graph of the answers that we got to a question about environmental threat and environmental awareness. So we asked people to answer on what's called a Likert scale, and you can see the items across the top of the chart. How much of a threat would you consider the following to the health of the waterway, be it the Trent Severn or the Rideau Canal? These answers, they come from the Trent Severn waterway, but a lot of the patterns are also evident in the Rideau Canal. So what we saw generally was a broad level of awareness across all of the items, okay? When we see this kind of a distribution where people are giving different answers to different items, that shows that they engage with the scale and they understand the differences in between the different items. The don't knows are also quite variable, but they tend to be quite low, in fact. If you are asking in the general population questions about specific environmental causes, the don't knows tend to usually be up around 25%. And so these are quite low, and that shows a high degree of engagement. We also see some clustering of a few of the answers. So at the top, or on the top half of the table, clearly regulations, either the lack of regulations or the lack of enforcement of existing regulations, are a major concern to people in the TSW. Down towards the bottom, we also see that there is quite a bit of concern about algae blooms and invasive species. And this is relevant to connecting values to actions because as organizations, we know that it is always most effective to talk about issues that people already care about. Okay, so making that connection from values to actions is to go where they are. That's the planned behavior theory kind of approach, and to use that as a starting point for building out changes in behavior and then also social norms. Next, please. I also want to point out that even though we asked our items on a scale, we also asked people to provide their views in open-ended formats, and so to open-ended questions. So, for example, we asked this question and then a parallel one in terms of the Rideau as well. Do you have any other concerns about the environmental health of the TSW? If yes, please describe. And this is just a random grab of 4 of those. And as you can see, some answers were quite general and some answers were very, very specific. And this provides us with a wealth of information that we are presently going through. And so we're doing coding of these kinds of responses. Some are going to be quite general, some are going to be hyper specific, and all of this information can be a tool for activism. Next, please. Something else that we discovered, if you look at this question, which asked people, are you a member of a community group, such as a conservation organization, a lake or cottages association, a trail association, club, or other group relevant to the waterway? We saw a huge amount of social capital. This is very unexpected to have this high level of engagement in terms of group membership as an answer to any survey. So there were 912 answers. Again, this is the Trent Severn Waterway. Specific to this question, we had about 65% of people indicating that they were members of some kind of a group. So this is a wonderful foundation for future action and is really reflected in the membership to our lake links as well. Next, please. This, by contrast, is a challenge. So when we ask people to indicate their age in terms of the respondents to the survey, and this was the same in the Rideau Canal, there is a very obvious skew to older respondents. If we look back in a particular at what we can learn from the conservation ethic perspective, there is a real need to engage with youth in order to carry the development of values forward. Next, please. So this is the last slide for my presentation, and it tries to draw both on the discussion of the theories and then also of the data to propose a few short and long-term strategies for trying to continue to connect values to action. The first recommendation that I would have would be to continue to try to develop the wheel of virtue that I discussed earlier. So to promote the development of values that lead to behaviors that are public and known and talked about, that then lead to social norms that then reinforce values. That is a real area where examples matter, and we can continue to promote pro-environmental behaviors. Coming out of the surveys, I think that there's a need to connect people's very specific concerns with larger issues. So as we saw in the open-ended questions there, some people have very particular concerns. To connect them with larger issues is going to bring it into the sphere of larger actions to take advantage of social networks and of social capital. The survey also indicates that there is a need to continue to connect with youth and to younger adults. It's not a surprise that we had a skew towards older respondents. That happens with a lot of surveys anyways, but it was a surprise the degree to which the people who chose to identify themselves as a stakeholder and to take time to answer the survey were quite a bit older than the general population. And then the fourth recommendation is to expand social networks and to continue to build social capital, because those are the core channels that we know through research that are going to lead to effective social action. And that's it for me. I think the next one is a thank you.
Thank you so much, Nathan. Some great information there. Does anybody have any questions? Monica. I can't see the chat, Monica, so you're gonna have
No, that's okay. There's no questions yet. People
Okay.
were just saying where they were calling in from.
Okay. Just looking. And I found it quite interesting that how you mentioned about we have to connect with youth, and it does begin at home, and it starts off young in order to develop the value and the and the actions and just make it something normal, an everyday norm. So I really appreciate.
So there was a question that just got posed by Holly in the chat. How do we connect with youth? So, I mean, that's a bit of $1 million question. We know that young people are spending less time outside and in nature than used to be the case. And there are a lot of reasons for that. It has to do with changes in parenting. It has to do with changes in social norms. It has to do with the rise of social media and so on. And so we're in a bit of an odd situation where the broader environmental awareness among young people is probably up and up to a level that we've never seen before because they learn about it in schools. We teach environmental values in a formal setting. And so the intellectual awareness of a lot of problems like climate change is quite high, but actual experiences in nature are on the decline. And so governments can do things like support things like overnight camps and getting kids back into nature in an unstructured way. That seems to be key as well. So to give them the kinds of longer term opportunities to explore that are not overly supervised by adults. But in terms of communication and engagement, I mean, like social media can be a tool, clearly. It's where kids are and where they spend a lot of time. I know that mine do. And so finding ways to connect with them through schools and through social media are probably advisable.
Great. Are there any other questions, Monica?
Yes, so Karen's asking, presumably Nathan's, the research that you mentioned, if it will be put together to help people reach out, like if they have access to those results and then they can share them with other people.
Yeah. So last year you heard about a different part of our research from Christine Baudouin and Isha Mistry. We have a website that we have developed. I'm afraid I don't have the link in front of me. I don't know why that slipped my mind, but it's something that I can send along to Lake Links and they can bounce it out again. The survey that we conducted in 2019 and 2020, it's been closed now for 8 months. It takes a while to really go through the data, particularly through the open-ended questions that have to be coded. And students also have to do their own work. So we're getting there. We have given presentations on this data before. They'll be on our website. And you can also pose specific questions to us. We've gotten that in the past as well, coming out of other workshops, that if people want to know specific things that we have uncovered, then that's usually a quick ask and we can get a quick answer out. But do keep an eye on that website as we go. We also do like scientific publications, but they tend to be harder to access. And so that's why we keep the website up, and I'll make sure that that link gets out.
Great. Any others, Monica?
Yes, there's just one more here from Bob. So he was wondering if there was a self-selection from those responding to the questionnaire. So he's
Absolutely.
saying that the demographic responding seemed pretty predictable.
Yes, yes. So I do want to say a word on that. I would say that self-selection happens for every kind of survey because everybody has the chance to say no. Unless it's the census, then you have a chance to say no. It's a particular problem with this kind of a survey because it's not a random sample survey, okay? So for example, we weren't randomly calling people across Ontario to ask them if they had a connection with the Rideau Canal or the Trent Severn. That's a difficult kind of thing to do, and most people would probably not, right? So in this case, we did what's called a broadcast method, where we connected with a lot of these groups, and then also through Carleton and the University of Ottawa's connections in the region, to broadcast this out to as broad an audience as possible. And so the self-selection is, yes, a big part of the data, but it's also revelatory too, that the people who are the most motivated to respond because they care about the issue are people of certain demographics too. So yeah, it's a known skew in the data. It doesn't invalidate it though, because the people who reply are those who are extremely engaged to begin with. It just changes how we interpret things.
Great.
And then there are just a couple resources that people are sharing in the chat, so people can browse that at their own.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. We really enjoyed having you as part of Lake Links this year. And as a token of our thanks, we have a little bottle of maple syrup for you that we will ship out to you. So if you could send Karen your mailing address, we will get that out to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and good luck with the rest of your meeting.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.